speed. Touchdown.
Welcome into the latest episode of Mac and Mose. Andy McNamara joined by the editor of GoDucks.com, Rob Mosley. We're here to preview Oregon's big road game at Stanford. The Pac-12 North title technically still up for grabs, Rob. Oregon obviously has to win this game. Stanford just needs an Oregon loss. They have an easier road, I guess you could say, to the Pac-12 crown. But right now, this is the biggest game in the conference this week.
Yeah, you'd say Stanford controls their own destiny, but then Chip Kelly would track you down and let you know that your destiny is predetermined and nobody controls or doesn't control it. Stanford just needs to either beat Oregon or beat Cal. Ducks need to win out and have Cal beat Stanford. So a much tougher road for Oregon. But it does, again, come down to Oregon and Stanford, as it always does. It's 5 or 6 years in a row now that the conference race or the Pac-12 North Division is going to come down to this Oregon-Stanford game in no small part. So I don't know if it's a rivalry yet, technically. I'm not sure the teams see it that way, but for Oregon fans, I'm sure they'd like nothing better than to see a victory over the Cardinals this week.
Well, we were talking in the office earlier today. There's sort of this perception that Oregon has a Stanford problem, or at least did until it was erased with a win at home at Autzen Stadium last year. But the Ducks have actually had a lot of success over Stanford in recent years. Stanford leads the all-time series, but Oregon has won 4 of 6 down there, 10 of 13 overall. So it's the magnitude of those losses against Stanford that has really sort of maybe made this, at least on the outside, seem like kind of a rivalry type atmosphere.
And for fans that can go back to I think the 2001 season and Stanford's win over Oregon that year, I mean it just lingers that Stanford's wins over Oregon, while not as frequent, have just been have been massive. And then just the nature of them when Stanford wins over the last few years, the way they're able to just grind out wins, and their power running game is so excruciating to watch, because it just you kind of know what's coming, and they make it really hard to stop. And so I think that makes those games resonate a little more too. But Oregon's offense is flying high right now with Vernon Adams and the way he's been playing. So Ducks will see if they can set their tone for this one.
Yeah, let's discuss the Oregon offense against the Stanford defense. I think if Oregon gets enough plays in this game, if they can get on the field on offense enough times, they're going to score points. We've seen that over the last couple weeks. They seem to start. They really started clicking at times in the last 3 games, all wins. They've also had some times where they've sort of sputtered along. But that second quarter against Cal this past weekend, that was probably the closest thing we've seen to maybe flawless execution on the offense's part, an increase in tempo that we hadn't seen much this year, and it really sort of got back to that Oregon offense that people are familiar with.
Yeah, the first quarter of this game is just going to tell the entire story. I mean, somebody's going to probably go up, 7-0, 7-3, 10-0, 10-3, and be able to establish their tone. Can Oregon build a lead and get Stanford out of its comfort zone of running the ball and playing ball control and clock control? Or can Stanford build a lead and then just grind it out using that same style? The first quarter always tells a story, with few exceptions. One of them being last week when Cal goes up 10-0. I think if Oregon's up 10, or if Oregon's down 10-0 this week at Stanford, you expect a different outcome.
The Oregon offense will be going up against somewhat of a new look Stanford defense, just in terms of personnel. I think that they do a lot of the same things. They always seem to have really solid linebacker play inside. That's no different this year. Blake Martinez, one of the top tacklers in the Pac-12, and is going to be key for that defense to stop Oregon's running game, which really started to fire on all cylinders against Cal.
Yeah, the Ducks ran the ball so well against Stanford last year, and I think surprised a lot of people. So you'd love to see a repeat of that. And given Royce Freeman's performance all season, and then the way Tony Brooks-James, Taj Griffin have been able to provide change of pace, Kenai Benoit has run well too. There's signs Oregon should be able to run the ball this week. The one thing the Ducks typically have done against Stanford over the years is run the quarterback. Darren Thomas, some of his most productive days running the ball came against Stanford, and he wasn't a guy prone to running, but the Ducks really have tried to attack the Stanford defense with the quarterback in the run game over the years. It's not something Vernon Adams has done a lot. It's not something he showed a ton of comfort with, but so I'm interested to see, does he get 6, 7, 8, not designed runs, but where he's encouraged to kind of keep it on the zone read and then try to attack the Stanford defense that way.
We saw him score against Cal on a run play where he flipped into the end zone. He definitely is a guy that he wants to sit back there and pass the ball or run around and pass the ball, but he loves to pass the ball. So, that was a little bit different, a little bit of a wrinkle, and maybe, like you say, we'll see more of that. I pull out the handy game notes here. Rob had mentioned the first quarter, just to give you an indication. The Ducks are 22-1 under Mark Helfrich when they have the lead after the first quarter, 4-1 this season. So, a rare case where it was Washington State, I believe, where they had the lead and were unable to follow through on that. But it's a huge indicator, and especially against a team like Stanford, who on offense, as we switch over to that side of the ball, they are who they are. I mean, they really haven't changed a whole lot. Andrew Luck was maybe a more dynamic quarterback than Kevin Hogan, but they still did a lot of the same things in terms of running the ball. They'll stack the line, they'll bring in extra offensive linemen, and they'll basically just tell you, okay, we're going to get 2 or 3 yards here, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it can be extremely frustrating, especially when you're behind.
Right, yeah, you've got that ogre position where they line up an offensive lineman in the backfield kind of as a fullback, and the Ducks have used Davis Mishir-Sapai, I hope I said that name right, this walk-on offensive lineman this week to try to play that position. But and again, so again, they know what they're going to see, and other teams know what they're going to see too. But Stanford is just so powerful, and they execute it so well, and they get 3,000 plus pounds out there with 11 guys. They're almost averaging 300 pounds a man when they're in that formation. That includes the quarterback and the running back, who aren't close to 300. So that tells you the kind of beef they're getting out there. But Kevin Hogan, the last couple weeks, he's run for 140 yards over the last 2 games. He's broken a few more runs. They've always tried to run the quarterback a little bit, but he's made some big plays out of it. Particularly at a long one against Washington State that make you go, oh, is that a different dimension to this offense? And he doesn't have, the quote-unquote arm talent of an Andrew Luck, but they find a way to get it done in the passing game too. And then, obviously Christian McCaffrey is so dynamic and can do so many different things. I think it's a point of concern in the last couple weeks just how much they haven't been just Christian McCaffrey the last couple weeks. When the more multiple an offense can be, the harder it is to defend.
They also have tight ends that they'll work in the passing game. That's been kind of a Stanford staple over the last 5-6 years.
Zach Ertz.
So yeah, we expect to see that. But to your point, Kevin Hogan, Christian McCaffrey, they're different players. It's a different offensive style maybe than a Utah, but there's a lot of similarities that I see in preparing for a Stanford team. When the Ducks prepared for Utah, they were extremely concerned about Booker.
Right.
They're clearly concerned about McCaffrey as well, a dynamic back that can do so many things, can catch the ball, can run the ball.
Can throw the ball.
Can
Booker
throw
threw
the ball. Yeah, can run with power between the tackles. And then you have a quarterback that maybe is, I don't want to say off the radar, but maybe not respected as much as they should be in Travis Wilson and Kevin Hogan. Both, like you say, might not have the arm talent, but they for whatever reason, are able to make plays with their arms, and they can run the ball, which is a big-time threat when you also are trying to worry about such a talented back in McCaffrey.
I don't like how we're talking ourselves into the fact that Stanford is another Utah. Based on how that Utah game went. But yeah, it's just, there's something to be said about a veteran senior quarterback. I mean, guys just get a lot better. They take big leaps when they're seniors and they have all that experience under their belt. And you saw it with Wilson. Neither one of us expected him to have the kind of game he did, and certainly Oregon had some defensive breakdowns that helped him, but he just looked like a different player in that game than he'd been in years past, and Hogan is doing that now too. So again, there's a lot to be on alert about regarding this Stanford offense. Oregon's defense definitely made strides against Cal, but I think these guys obviously stylistically are a lot different. The secondary really made some big steps against Cal, but the front seven is going to have to step up to the plate against this Stanford team. We haven't heard the names of guys like Rodney Hardrick, Joe Walker a lot the last few weeks, and style of opponent has a little bit of an impact on that. But those are guys that need to have big games and that need to play better this week than they've played maybe all season.
We talked about it when we reviewed the Cal game a little bit about how had you just watched the Cal game and you hadn't seen some of the earlier games in the season, you'd be pretty comfortable with the Oregon secondary. Well, this, barring any sort of unforeseen injuries or otherwise, this will be the third straight game that Oregon will be able to keep the same 4 players in the secondary and start the same unit essentially for 3 straight games, which is huge. But to your point, this is an opponent where those inside linebackers absolutely have to bring it, and they have to have one of their better performances. Rodney Hardrick, who you spoke of, had a big moment in the last time the Ducks traveled to Stanford. It ended up being a loss, but he had a big touchdown return on a blocked kick that brought the Ducks right back into that game and gave them a chance. So maybe there's some good mojo there for him. Joe Walker, another senior, has to step up. We've seen a little bit more of Danny Mattingly and Jimmy Swain the last couple weeks, particularly against Cal. Jimmy Swain made some plays, and he's going to be a guy that's probably going to be counted on as well.
I think Mattingly's the guy I'm going to watch. I think if there's some struggles early to stop the run, he's got a big frame. I think there's been a lot of hope that he'd be kind of Kiko Alonso 2.0. And I could see him being a guy that Don Pelham turns to earlier rather than later to say, hey, if we're struggling to stop the run, Danny, get in there and see if you can put a hat on a hat.
Well, it's going to be it should be a very entertaining matchup. It'll be stressful, I'm sure, for Oregon fans. Probably a little bit also for Stanford fans because they want to try to lock up this Pac-12 North. And as Rob mentioned, the Pac-12 title, really not just the North, but the title has kind of gone through these two teams over the last few years. So it's definitely the marquee matchup in the Pac-12 this week. 6-3 Oregon, 4-2 in the Pac-12 against 8-1 Stanford. They are unbeaten, 7-0 in conference play. It'll be on Fox. It's at 4:30, so a decent kickoff Pacific time. 4:30 kickoff on Fox. Gus Johnson is calling the play-by-play, so that'll always add a little bit of flair, I guess you could say. We won't have the Maserati Marcus or the DeAnthony Thomas stuff, but maybe he'll spitball something for.
It'd be interesting, if say unfortunately if things come to pass that Stanford's grinding out like a 15-play. 90-yard drive that takes 8 minutes off the clock. How exciting can Gus possibly make that sound? That'll be a challenge for him.
It'll be a very... See, he has challenges with this one, too. We'll be back early next week to talk about this one. In the meantime, if you want to get to us on Twitter, that's the best way to do so. You can get me at McNamara UO. He is at Duck Football. Until next time, we'll see you.
Gets the corner into the end zone for the touchdown. It's through 50. He's got the speed. Touchdown.